warm welcome to People Matters Take HR.
Yeah. We kept giving clarion calls here with good mornings and then getting everyone's energy up. At upGrad Enterprise, every time we have a conference or a seminar, we start with, how's the Josh? So how's the Josh? That's as bad as the good mornings that came in this morning, really. I think maybe the juices or the snacks there weren't as good as everyone promised it to be. How's the Josh? Okay.
Awesome.
You got it wrong.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for
Lovely.
being with us.
Thank you for having me here.
And it's personally a fun moment. I think as an entrepreneur, I read your book maybe in the very initial stages of People Matters, and it's a book that inspired me. It's a book that gave me a lot of energy, and it also kind of gave me that roadmap that, okay, if this man could have think so wild, then maybe I can also do it. So thank you so much for inspiring entrepreneurs and inspiring businesses to thrive.
I think my inspiration for that was really that we don't talk too much about our failures. So I think it wasn't, I'm an accidental author, but I think two things about the book for me was talking about a journey. I think we get too obsessed, and I think specifically relevant for an HR conference is we set those one or two goals, and then we're obsessed with outcome, we're obsessed with the one or two things. And I think the book for me was very important for each of us here as human resource and people leaders, but also, therefore, inspiring people to focus as much on the journey as the final outcome. Both are equally important.
Yeah.
And I think the second one is, we keep saying it's okay, fail fast, fail whatever else, but actually we don't. We don't respect the importance of failure as part of the KPIs that actually is 10 times better training than most of the training we get. Yeah. Because most of the training tells you is how to ring fence yourself. Most of your learning experiences teach you or talk about risk averseness in many parts. Yeah. But actually the best training and the best outcome from there is with failures. Yeah. So I think those were the two inspirations. I think they're both relevant for the topic of what we're discussing today.
Super, super. So dream with your eyes open here with you today to be with us. In the next 25 minutes or so, what we're going to be doing is we want to tap into Ronnie's experiences of building and scaling teams, because a business and a product can be successful, but if we were not able to scale our teams, we can't scale the impact that this product and services can have. So we're going to tap into your knowledge and experiences there. We want to tap into the insight of what does it take to make learning happen. And as you know, your latest business is, of course, in the learning sphere. So I really want to get into tapping into your experience and learning there. Then we're going to move into a little bit about India overall as a development, inspiration to action, not just as an organization, but also as a country. How can we tap into that? And then finally, we'll try to get into how do you move from inspiration to action. So this is the flow. We're going to come to questions in the middle. So be ready if you have questions, because I'm going to come to you in the middle. Let's start with the first.
It's got a lot of noise. It looks like there are 5 drones above us or something like that.
What? The noise or the light? Okay. Only we can hear the noise. All right. So you're comfortable?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay, we'll manage. So let's hear your experiences on scaling teams. You've done it. I think one news that I read, your friends used to say you have 9 lives. And I want to tap into a lot of those lives you have survived because you were able to build amazing teams around you. So what has been some of the reflections on how do you build great teams that actually help you scale a vision and a product into the market?
So maybe I'll just start with the insight of a very interesting research report that was put there. And I sort of looked at the 3 or 4 calls of everyone talking, and I think the 3 facets that came out of what are the things we should be looking out for. I mean, I think today in the entire aspect of people management, the 3 most underrated things that we constantly discussed at upGrad Enterprise, and my colleague Shrikant, I think he's somewhere in the audience there, and I discuss a lot. I think the imperatives that were put down there are very relevant, and I saw many of you all taking photographs of that. But personally, I think we really need to look at recalibrating, and I think innovation, we all talk about it. We all talk about how our teams can go out there, but I think there's still very little. The benchmark is moving so fast that for me, unless we have fresh ideas and innovation, we're not going to be able to break that cycle. So I think to me, that imperative is one. I think the second one is we need to identify. Most of the time, we are copying and pasting things that are 3 or 4 criterions there. We really need to identify not what is relevant for another organization, but really what is relevant for our own organization, and then prioritize that. But I think the third and the most difficult one, and I hate to say that very bluntly, is acceptance. Because I've seen that on both sides. I've seen that building an organization, and today I see that in an organization where we're partnering with people, that without accepting that there are some shortfalls, you need to introspect a big amount. And I think there, especially for us, and look, as a CEO, you are an HR head. As an HR head, you are an HR head. At the end of the day, everyone in the leadership team, anyone, and I keep saying leadership is not about managing 100 people. The minute you're a manager, you're a leader in some sense. I think our acceptance to the issue sometimes, if we can change that, to me, that's a very important imperative here. If you're going to take away 5 nuggets, you're going to spend a fair bit of time. You've come here for networking. You've come here for absorbing a few things. But at the end of the day, you may have a lot of notes or you may have 5 points. But if you have just 5 nuggets that you take out of the next 2 days, that's incredible. But in that, you'll have to do a lot of acceptance, because only from acceptance will come innovation and recalibration. So I think that cycle, to me, is very, very critical and important if you want to bring about change. I know we keep saying AI will change things and technology will change things, but actually we have to look at it and design it into our own. And I think we then look at outside forces, then they become our KPIs in the middle of all of that. The second part I would say here for scale, since you mentioned that, is our real understanding. It's like we can't really start a consumer business without deep, deep understanding of the consumer. And look, I've come from a media sector and now in the learning, skilling, and education, where I think the only reason in media we survived and thrived was not only because of creative innovation, but really a deep understanding and preempting trends. If you're not 3 steps ahead of preempting trends, then you're not really succeeding. And I think specifically in people management and in HR, we kind of think there's a template and then we need to do that. Actually, in people management, if we can, our job at upGrad is to anticipate what is the next 3 or 4 big careers of tomorrow and talk about learning and training for that. If we don't start thinking of that, if we don't start focusing, today our focus, for example, is on data, it's on tech, it's on artificial intelligence. But we also know that in 3 months, we'll have to maybe drop one or expand 2 or do what we need to do. So when we look at that scale, to me, that innovation is also a very important criteria.
And I'm going to come to you on the learning segment in a minute, but I'm very intrigued about the point that you mentioned about anticipating those trends. And I think it's becoming more and more difficult because there's just so much of noise, there's so much of access that sometimes how do you really
Yeah, but noise is
really
the worst part, right? Because noise sucks you totally. It completely distracts you and it completely sucks you. Like we're distracted if there's a noise there. That's a distraction.
Yeah.
So I think the key part here is if you're not 3 steps ahead of what your next working force is going to do. We run a university at upGrad Enterprise, one of the largest skill universities in India, in BKC. Yeah. And I'd got, on our advisory board, we had one of the top consulting firms, we have one of the top auditing firms, we had 3 bank heads, and they all came to address about 500 of our young adults. And one of them started up and started to talk about, see, I'm here to tell you what are the careers of tomorrow and what are the opportunities we see. And 2 young girls raised their hand and said, sorry, sir, we're going to tell you what are the careers of tomorrow because you're not in touch with what we're doing. Yeah. We are going to determine what are the careers of tomorrow. And I think, therefore, I would urge everyone that introspect like a consumer. You have to talk not just to your team, but to the anticipatory team, because from that, you're going to get 10 times more insights than the past. The past is always good, The future is not going to come from actually looking at what went wrong in the past and what went forth. And I think that to me is a very important one. The gig economy is going to change how we work. We all know that.
Yeah.
How are we going to actually talk about that? How are we going to build culture? How are we going to build scale if there's a concept of remote working?
Yep.
If you're going to get the best talent, but they're going to come a little bit on their own terms, they can't fit into a sandbox. How are you going to operate an organization with some guardrails, but no sandboxes? Those are actually the most compelling conversations that need to be had today than anything else.
Yeah. And the answer is in the deep understanding of the consumer.
Well, it's also, the answer isn't being nimble. The answer is being open-minded. And the answer is then for accepting that if your workforce of tomorrow is thinking very differently, but you want to say this is how it's going to work,
Yeah.
how is that mismatch going to happen?
Yeah.
Are you therefore going to leave a lot of phenomenal talent out there?
Yeah.
And if you attract them, how are you going to retain them? Because if you have some better insights, and if you can train them in things that they never thought of, that's your retention strategy today.
Yeah.
In media, I think when you ask me scale and retaining and dealing talent, I think there's a certain sense of joy at work that just happens automatically. Because every day, you're creating something out of nothing. So when you have that germ of an idea, that excitement every day is a fresh day. And I think that is what the younger generation today is looking at it. There is that 10 to 15% that is just looking at walking through life. And you'll always have that. But you also need those people. And there's the top 50% actually that today are looking at breaking through. They don't want to work in guardrails. But at the same time, how are we going to make them work in unison to work with guardrails?
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Ronnie, for that. So I'm going to invite you to share the story of why learning. I think as a successful entrepreneur, to realize and to take on the leap once again to start upGrad. Why learning space? What excited you about starting the organization in a very little, obviously different sector that you had been before? So tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, I think I got introduced by saying storytelling.
Yeah.
At the heart of it, that's what most of people management is. That's what learning is. That's what skilling is. That's what education is all about. At the end of the day, you'll remember your two great teachers from school or college, if you had any memories of that more than your subjects. So people influence you, and stories influence you. The people who expressed it better, who explained a boring or a very tricky maths problem by simplifying it, or made history excellent and interesting for you, is really what it is. So for me, moving from media, where I sort of exited for very many reasons, and looked at this, became a natural one. At the core of it, I think whatever we're doing in people and learning and lifelong learning is a lot to do with storytelling and inspiring. So that to me was the one connect. I think my penny dropping moment is we run a pretty large not-for-profit foundation where we work in rural India, specifically in Maharashtra, and we work with about 1,000 schools and Anganwadis. And I think the change that what we take for granted here, and I sat down with the kids, what do you want to do when you grow up is a very basic question, which we all just take for granted, right? But for 50% of India, that's not a question that is asked by anybody. How do you raise aspiration levels? And we knew that when we were walking to the schools, it was not about giving them the science lab, or it wasn't about giving them the maths lab. The career counseling that we gave those people at the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th standard was life-changing. And it's tricky, because their parents didn't have that aspiration. And I think this is the story of India today. If we want to be where we want to be in 2047, we will have to figure out how the other half lives. And I think to that extent, to me, it was a very strong penny dropping moment, that to raise aspiration levels for half of India's population, if I can do whatever I need to do in my little bit, it just sounded like an incredible next 20-year journey from storytelling.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One of the things that I think we all struggle in this room is how we look at learning in organizations. And I would say, to be a little provocative, on the tick-in-the-box kind of mindset. Not only from an employer perspective, and all of us struggle every day to really, really pull instead of, push instead of pull learning, but also from an employee perspective, saying people still look at learning, to kind of for my next promotion or my next growth, but not really, as you mentioned before, lifelong learning.
Yeah.
How do we change that mindset or transform that container of ticking the box?
Well, I guess my operative word is first we need to accept whether that's a problem area or not. There is a tick box element to almost 50% of the work that we do. We do it because that's part of the function, that's what we need to do. But I think today what is a clarion call for everybody is to think out of the tick box. Because yes, there's a budget. So obviously there's a budget, then there's an allocation, then there's a priority. Then where do you stand in the pecking order of the CEO's attention, the annual budget attention? So that kind of puts you in that tick the box segment. But there isn't not a budget, there isn't not a focus area. If you can tell P&L heads, I'm going to change your life. And I think we do that every day at upGrad Enterprise, right? We're trying to influence and change a working professional's life. So you need to figure out what's that acupuncture point, as I would call it, that needle pricking, but not just needle pricking, because that's very temporary. You need to needle prick and then do the acupuncture where it goes down to the muscle. That's when it starts coming about. So I would say the tick the box is a challenge here for everything that we do in HR and people management, because it is in a box. There is a certain sense. It has been done before. People come in, they need to go through a certain training. Every annually we need to do that, and it's necessary. But if we can compartmentalize that to 50%, and if we had to make that presentation to the whole group of people, that here's the 50% that we're doing very well, or we're doing it, and here are the challenges. But here's the 50% that's going to change how we hire, how we retain, how we perform. And I think we can take a responsibility for 10% of augmented growth and revenue coming from innovation that can come from these ones. I think it changes the landscape. And to be honest, when you see culture and you see some organizations, and I'm not talking about, some new economy companies today are not going by the book. Yeah. So today our mandate is not to have a tick box approach. Yeah. It is about sitting. So if you're going to walk into the technology room and have 3 ideas and have a brainstorm, you need to walk into inverted commas, the HR room and say, okay, so what can we do different? What do we do different in hiring? What do we do different in selecting? What do we do different in inspiring? And culture is not anymore taking an offsite and putting it on the glass board and putting it at your reception, because it's out of date in 60 days, whether we like it or not, respectfully. Because anyway, if they're not, the next talent that comes and reads it, if you're a high attrition company, and new economy companies do have high attrition, has got its own challenges. So I think the tick the box, the best way to do it is accept, move it to 80%, move it to 50%, and a huge internal sell, which can happen through your own conviction and putting your neck out on the line that we can make a difference.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm going to come now for questions to the audience, but I would love you to connect your first point about predicting trends and your point about finding these acupuncture points that really matter.
Finding
the acupuncture points? Sorry, yeah, okay. I'm not pronouncing it properly. So I would love if you can connect both dots. How can we look at the trends, and how do we finally connect that back into skilling needs? Because at the end of the day, most of those trends that will affect our business model will have a very deep skilling
and I think
challenge.
It's a very relevant point, and I think that's the practicality of everything else. Otherwise, it can just become another tick box of a very innovative nature, which is not, suddenly you don't want to be in the completely wild, wild west approach. So I think let's take an example, which is like the 2 buzzwords today, which is AI, right? And I think we all need to accept that it's there as a mantra. It's now a situation where if a CEO doesn't talk about an analyst call, he's in trouble. Yeah. So if he doesn't talk about it, he has to talk into the internal meetings. If he talks about the internal meetings, everyone else needs to come up with a presentation of what I'm doing for AI. And we've seen this. I've seen this when broadband came in, the internet came in, everything was going to take over the world. And it made a huge impression, but it didn't take over the world. So I think today, I would just urge everybody that let's look at AI in a very positive manner, not in a displacement manner, not in a threat manner. And look, when something rises that, normally what happens is the bad points come out first, and then the good points, because that's when the mature elements come in. So I think today we should not overemphasize that one single importance, with the result that we're almost giving it disproportionate priority. So if you ask me for the links, if I anticipate that this is what it is, if I over-leverage and over-index on this, I'm going to be disappointed, because it's not going to have that sense of threat or opportunity that we're now envisaging it to be, based on a whole cycle of public markets or private markets or investors or CEO pressure. So I think that would be the best way to do that. The acupuncture moment is really two things. You need to be closer to your future employees and your present employees. You need to understand them, and not just what's your career growth. That's not the only conversation to be had today. It's really their aspiration. And I would say today, I think for most people, we did it at our last offsite, where I wanted to bring a theme of frugality into the organization. So we did an offsite, and I didn't tell the whole team there. And just as we were heading there, I took a detour, slightly pre-planned, into our villages. And we spent the whole morning with 2 villages. And when we finished that 4 or 5 hour session, where we had 40 skilled people which we had done skilling with, and they were skilling in hospitality. This is no longer skilling in masonry and carpentry. Those young kids wanted to be in hospitality, which is a growing sector. Somebody wanted to start their own dhaba on the highway and be an entrepreneur. Somebody wanted to start a cashew plant there. To see those people that with no resources, here they were with that dying energy, and they were going to make it in life. And then we had excellent scholarship girls that came in, 40 of them, and they spoke about their career ambitions of what they wanted to do. And they were not about doing BCom, and they were not doing about being a nurse only. They wanted to go all the way up to being a scuba driver. And I think that changed the entire 1.5 days of that conference, because it just set the agenda so much without saying anything. And that changes that. So to me, those are some of the out-of-box thinkings that we all need to think about how do we carry people. The penny dropping moment for them was to understand, and I said, but this is your consumer of tomorrow, because this person today is going to be at a 3 lakh salary, he'll get to an 8 lakh salary, he'll get to a 24 lakh salary, and he's going to come and walk the path with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for sharing that. So, questions from the audience, if I can. Oh my God. All right. So I'm going to try my very best to take, are you fine if I take 2-3 questions in one go? Because some questions may be similar. So can we have the mic, if you have the mic, just introduce, I think, just introduce yourself. Yeah. No, it's not on? Not yet? No. Okay, do you want to go ahead?
Is it a mic?
Yeah, it is a mic, but it's not on.
At every tech conference, it always happens. The
Yeah, it
mics
always
never work at a
happens,
tech
isn't
conference. If there's a normal conference, the mics always work. You use the word tech.
I can hear you, and then I
No,
can
I
repeat.
think the rest of the people have to hear you
All right,
also.
no worries. Let's check. Check. No, not yet? No.
Toy as a mic.
Oh,
now it's
there
fine.
you are. Awesome.
All
Now
right,
we can
thank
hear you.
So I wanted to talk
Would
a
you
little.
introduce yourself,
Yeah.
please?
Okay. My name is Sanjay.
Sanjay, yeah.
I have come from Novonesis. I work in Novonesis as a learning partner. So my question was, when you say about storytelling, Ronnie, and it's quite inspiring when you talk about thinking out of the box. My question, I'm a big believer in self-learning and getting self-motivated to learn.
Yeah.
So when Esther talked about push and pull, you as an organization push certain things because you need to push it. But then what is the power of storytelling, or how would you think about it?
Yeah.
In terms of getting people to understand that the career is in their hands,
Yeah.
and they need to learn, even if they have spent certain time. And multidisciplinary learning, because if you are in finance, you want to only grow in finance. Or if you are in HR, I've been in HR, but I've also done entrepreneurship, I've also done different things.
Yeah.
So I think of it differently, but then, and I have grown because of that.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I'm unable
got
to
it.
think
Sure.
about how to.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You may want to pass it to Aisha. You can just drop it. You can throw it. That's the beauty of a toy. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Just hold it closer to you. That's
Yeah. Go
Go
ahead.
You want to answer to him first?
No, we'll just take 2-3 questions in one go.
All right. Hi, my name is Dr. Mohit Sharma. I'm from the consulting background, like you mentioned. My question is how, in the organizations particularly, the fear of missing out is driving the learning curve, because what you might have learned 6 months back is completely obsolete. So how organizations can drive that learning, in an organization when exactly you're probably staying on the trends, right? With the trends and not missing out on it.
Awesome. Thank you.
So,
You
thank
pass
you.
it, and then I'll go to the side of the room in the second batch. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Jai Hind Ronnie. I'm Kanal Ahmed. Thank you for an awesome session. The
We didn't-
query,
yeah.
query part here is close to 1,000 odd veterans retire every year, and they go for their conventional general management training to IMs and legacy institutions. 99% don't get jobs because the training there is legacy. How do you think upGrad can help? Thank you.
All right, so let me just try to merge the three questions from.
First and second are common.
Yeah. So we have how do we motivate for especially multidisciplinary learning connected with, that fear of missing out. And then finally, how do we connect that with actual jobs or opportunities? So go ahead.
Sure. No, and I think, look, the push and pull factor is a very important point for almost everybody here, right? And it'll never be all push and it'll never be all pull, even if you get to that stage, because that means something wrong with the organization if it's all pull. I gave you the example of the detour of if I wanted to make a point on frugality, the best way was to experience it.
Yep.
That to me is a good anecdote for an example of when you want to get something done, doing it directly by telling people, look, this is frugality, the emphasis will be, this is another cost-cutting exercise. But if I didn't want to say this is not a cost-cutting exercise, because cost-cutting is always viewed as negative, anti-growth, something wrong with the organization, are we finishing our... All of that goes away, where you actually say, look at this. This is the real world. This is our core group. So my simple answer to you is, with different groups, and one of the things I think is one size does not fit all. And the grass is never greener on the other side. Even if I have to say that, that's just my personal point of view. And I think one size does not fit all. So when you're looking at that element of pull, it would mean forming clusters, low-hanging clusters where you can see sometimes you're breeding competitiveness, sometimes you're breeding an absolute level of what it can be if they were at this level. So I think, again, storytelling plays a big role, because if you can inspire people to start imagining what they didn't think of, and they can go there, not from a growth path technical point of view, and you need small wins. You're not going to be able to do that by taking 100 people or 50 people. So you have a small group, 7 or 8 people do it, plant them into conference rooms and meetings after that, suddenly stop by saying, instead of a tea break, let's just hear this gentleman, he broke out, we had this conversation 6 months back, this happened here. To me, that's the power of how pull happens. Pull doesn't happen because we made a chart and a POA and a plan and a schedule. That's just one of the ways I would look at that. And I think connected with that would be...
So I will probably take Amit's question and expand it a little bit. How do we connect learning with jobs or learning with actual growth and development?
Yeah, there's no fine answer on that. I mean, it is true that it's becoming not less relevant, but there is a plus being added. There's a plus sign being added to everything that you're doing with formal education. There's a plus sign being added every 6 months. And maybe 2 years from now, it'll be added every 4 months. And maybe 5 years from now, there'll be a plus sign of what you need to do plus almost every month. And I think that's how we need to think about it. I mean, today, I think one of our other major focuses overall at upGrad Enterprise is what I call super skills. I call it super skills because most of us call it soft skills, but it's too soft a word for everyone to take it very seriously. So we kind of rebranded it as super skills in that sense. And it's different strokes for different folks again. Everyone thinks super skills is about communication. Okay, fine. I think, I did my BCom and I stopped learning. Today, I'm a product of sitting on this stage confidently because of what I did in theater. It taught me certain sense of super skills that I think nothing else or no other learning would have taught me. That's just my background. So sometimes in looking at people's extracurricular activities and hobby, when they're most comfortable at what they're doing and where they can express themselves most, if you can draw that out, I think that's the plus that will happen there. Can it connect always to a job? Maybe not. But I think it has a more likelihood. Most of us are training people on the interview skills. And I think overpart it's also an overkill, right? Because if I'm completely training everyone for only interview skills, it might be a complete relapse after that because they're so pumped up with interview skills that they may not be the product after that. So I think that connect needs to happen. To me, the soft skills, super skills element is going to redefine the connect between formal learning to a job, but most important, to staying in a job. 5 years back, you would get a mandate that says, okay, the bottom 10% we need to evaluate because we got to give a 10% increment, let's knock off 10% from here, and that's how we'll justify that. I think today the world is already, whether we like it or not, if you're not on the top 50 percentile of the company, you're not in a secure job. Let's face it. So I think when I talk to entrepreneurs, I keep saying, when I was an entrepreneur, it wasn't aspirational because everyone said, oh, you couldn't get a good job. And I was having a discussion with my parents about our job security versus the risk of entrepreneurship. Today, I think they're both in the same risk zone, totally in the same risk zone. Monetary risk, career risk, but risk.
Super. Thank you so much, Ronnie. And as I promised you, we'll take one question from here. So
We already got that 1 minute marker
yes,
from there.
go ahead. Make it count.
Yeah, sure.
Not yet.
Audible?
Yes.
Yes, super. Good morning. 12 years, Esther, and counting. Congratulations and all
Thank
the
you
best.
so much. Thank
Ronnie,
you.
very good morning. First time that we got to know that you are getting out of the showbiz and the media was through Salman Khan in one of the award shows. It was a big decision, right? And the theme is about how do we change inspirations into actions, right? So while some of these things will inspire too many people, what led to the change is what we will love to know from you. And you rightly mentioned leadership starts when you actually start managing people, right? Even if it is a smaller team, but you lead. So this is more about how people can become leaders to drive change, first for themselves and then for the larger audience. Thank you.
Yeah, so I didn't reach a crossroad. I'll be brief about that. I'm not sure it's totally relevant here, but it wasn't a real crossroad. Like most things, I think serendipity is underrated. And for me, it's played a big role. So an opportunity comes your way, and that's a certain sense of crossroad. And I think the second one is there's a huge difference between being emotional about something and being passionate about it. And I was extremely, extremely passionate about having been a founder, built a media company, and media can be quite charismatic, quite ensnaring, quite permanent in your mind, because who wants to leave behind what everyone else from the outside perceives as a glamorous world? Far from it in any case. But to me, it was a combination of serendipity, working with an incredible partner and a phenomenal brand that was the Walt Disney Company. Yeah. And when that opportunity came in and knocked on the door, it's the choices you make in life. I think you get defined, your career gets defined by 3, 4, 5 choices you make in your life, frankly, at the end of the day. When you start making notes of it, that's where it is. So to me, a combination of serendipity and the fact that here's a brand that I had built, but here's a brand that was 100x mine that was taking it over. That was a big compliment. Second, I felt I could actually have a second innings. And there's a big difference between a second act and a second innings. A second act to me is you get out of what you're doing and then you go back to do it again in another organization, in another place, or whatever else. A second inning is you just shift tracks. When I moved out of this industry and I started with upGrad, a lot of my ex-colleagues called and said, but how come you're not taking me on? And I said, look, that's the other recipe here, and it's very relevant for people. I urge everyone, you can't grow individually. And everyone that came and said, look, we had a great innings, but I want to think afresh. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here and each of us will be complimenting each other. We'll complete each other's sentences. We won't really grow. So I think that was the fresh beginning for me. A combination of serendipity and a mature element, which was in prospective, not at that moment when I was making it, that being emotional about a decision is very different from being passionate about that. And I was very passionate about it, but I was not emotional of holding on to something that I had founded if it could go a different trajectory with somebody else.
Wonderful. So I couldn't think of a better question to close the panel, so thank you very much. And we wish you wonderful success and impact in this second innings. Thank you very much, and a big round of applause for Ronnie.